Guess you never know when your career's going to peak, do you? Listen, I want to take you back to February 2013. Maybe close your eyes, think what you were doing back then, but I'm going to tell you a story of a 31-year-old fifer by the name of Steve. Now, the 2013 Steve was sad. He was lonely. He was heartbroken. He was directionless. And ladies and gents, I don't use this word lightly. I was depressed. And I needed a change. I saw a job advert for an analyst role at a company called the Langcat, and I decided, why not? Let's do it. Fast forward 10 years, almost to the day, 10 years. 10 years worth of decisions, 10 years worth of chaos, 10 years worth of chance encounters, 10 years of the chaos, the wonder of the universe interacting. 10 years of love, loss, grief, heartbreak, and everything in between have led us to this moment, today. Now that's my story, that's my narrative for today, but each and every one of you sat in the auditorium today, you have your own story. Everything you have ever done in your life has led you to this moment in time. The shared sense of occasion, this event, this sense of community in the room today. And for what? For an organisation putting on the biggest, I think, the busiest, the most beautiful, certainly the best event, the one that we are most proud of, I think, as the day unfolds. And how have we decided to start it? By hiding a tired, middle-aged Scotsman behind a podium for 20 minutes. As I heard you all file in with pins and needles in my feet. Now, ladies and gents, I ask of you today, what is an even stupider idea than hiding one?
Hang on. This is harder than you'd think. All right? Oh, bloody hell. Hey, Steve.
All right?
Well, wow, it's a lot of you. I wouldn't know because I was hiding behind a podium. You know, like after the Edinburgh event, right, in October, when we said, look, if we're going to do another one of these, it's going to need some theatricality about it. We're going to need to really blow people away at the start. Nailed it.
Nailed it.
Nailed it. All right, everybody, thank you for indulging us. It's Home Truths, it's Langcat Live, the first one of 2023. Thank you all for coming. There are so many of you. The lights are very bright, but I can see a lot of people. And thank you to everybody that's streaming in at home as well. We can't see you, but we do know what you're doing. And if you keep doing that, it will never get better. Your mother told you that, so stop it and concentrate. But you can go and make yourself a cup of tea if you like. It's Home Truths. We want today to be a little bit different, Steve, I think. A little bit of a step away from some of the events that we might have done before and the events that other people do. And we'll start maybe by just explaining what Home Truths is in just a moment. But first, there are some things from conferences that you need to keep, and some of them are housekeeping. So I'm going to do a tiny bit, right? Assuming that you're all fairly sensible people, you'll all remember the entrance through which you came to get in here. If anything happens that you don't like, you go straight back out through that entrance. I'm obviously referring to emergencies here, but equally if you're just not having fun. There's the door.
Can I?
I'm kidding, of course. You are now super glued to your seats. So back out that way. As we go through the day, there's lots of breaks, there's lots of chances to go back upstairs to the Florence Hall, which is gorgeous, isn't it? That's such a nice place. Visit the stands of our sponsors. We've got to talk about sponsors a little bit, right? Because nobody enjoys conferences that are full of sponsor content and all that kind of stuff. Our sponsors have been absolutely incredible. We said to them at the start that not only can't they do that, they can't even take to the stage. There's not a single bit of content in today's show from any sponsor. The only speaker from a provider is one who isn't a sponsor of today, right? Everybody else you're going to hear from, apart from Lancats, is a practitioner, is a planner or a paraplanner. And that's deliberate for the day as well. So we do want to change it up. You've got breaks outside here. Our key sponsor, Parmenion, have the Parmenion Lounge, which is really that space out there, which is also called the Jarvis Foyer. But today it's the Parmenion Lounge. And there's a few things you can do in there. Eleanor Winton, the futurologist, if any of you were at Parmenion's Let's Grow event recently, she's going to do a session there at lunchtime, which I think you could book into. You can also book in for a demo of our own analyzer system. Home truths about events like this is that underneath them there's a little bit of commerciality. I'm just letting you know. So anybody that feels like they'd like to have a wee demo and sign up to Analyzer, I would heartily endorse this product or service, and also heartily endorse this product or service that Parmenion are demoing out there as well, which is their Advisory Models Pro system. So you can book in and do that. Now, other bit of housekeeping, other than hope you have a brilliant day, participate and all that, is about Wi-Fi and the devices in your pockets. Could everybody take their device out of their pocket, please? I'm going to make you do this again later, but I don't trust you. So I'm going to make you do it now as well.
I'm doing it.
You do trust them?
No, I'm doing it though.
You're doing it? Well, that's great. There are 2 different Wi-Fis that you can use. So if one seems a bit slow because it's maybe getting a wee bit busy, there's another one you can use. And one is just Reba Public, and that's got no password on it. But we've also got a Lancat one for today, which is called, prize for anybody that can guess? Lancat, well done. And you do need a password for that one. And if you're going to join that network, and you don't have to, you can use the public one, but if you're going to join that network, the password is hashtag, then capital L for Lancat. L-A-N-G-C-A-T, but with a capital L. But you don't have to use that one, as I say, you can use the public one. So while you're having a wee think about that, let's talk about home truths, Stephen, and we did want to make today a little bit different, didn't we?
We did, and I think the first home truth of the day belongs to us. In fact, where, going back to our Edinburgh, I don't know how many of you were at our Edinburgh event, but it was full of great people saying great things. But we definitely had a moment together, just as we were about to go on stage after the first break, where we had a bit of a powwow and we said, we are just conforming to the norm of conferences. There's no actual debating, there's no arguing, it's too safe. It's very good people saying very safe things and agreeing with each other very pleasantly.
And we're nothing if not combative. So we want today to be a lot less safe. So that was the genesis of Home Truths, and the idea behind it is that there are things in this sector that we simply don't address, right? And we don't address them for one of 2 reasons. Either they're too hard, right? Just too difficult to pull at. So you can see in the agenda up here, we're going to spend some quality time on investment. We'll come back to that in just a wee moment. But why have we not pulled at that before? Why don't we pull at the issues about portfolio construction? The answer is because it's too hooked in all around the place. And we'll come back to that, as I say, in a later session. Or if they're not too difficult to pull at, they're just self-evident, or we think they are. There's no point even going at them because we've all decided what the answer is. But what if we're wrong? What if that's not the case? And that's what we're going to get into as we go through the day. Should we do a bit about the structure of the day, Steve?
Yeah, let's do it.
Should we do that? And then we'll get off and let the next thing get on. Okay, here we go. Aye!
Oh my God. What? Oh, who put that there?
Whoa.
Nobody leaves.
Hang on.
Nobody leaves this auditorium till we find out who put that up there.
That's outrageous.
Outrageous. Listen, I'm a football guy. I don't even understand rugby, if I'm honest. But what I do understand is Scotland have pumped England 3 times in a row. To use the technical term, pumped. I read the other day that one thing you shouldn't do is alienate a big proportion of your audience in the first 10 minutes. So how do you think I'm doing?
I'd rate you a 9.5 out of 10, Steve,
okay,
on that. All right, here's actually the structure of the day. We've broken it into 5 pillars. And they are, as you can see, investment, and particularly looking at centralized investment propositions. Advisor as manufacturer, no hotter topic at the moment about advisor as platform. We're going to hear from people who've gone down that road and a planner who's absolutely not going down that road. We're going to look at restricted versus independent. We're going to see some data in a minute that I think will change some people's minds, or should do. We're going to look at the target market for firms. Should it be broad, or do you need to really, really focus down? And then to finish off with something that I know will be close to a lot of your hearts. We're going to look at the divide between planning and advice in the sector and try and work out where we want to be going forward. For all of these, as I've said, we're going to hear from practitioners, and a lot of them are going to say things that you might not agree with, or that you might not enjoy. And that's the point, because the one thing I think that is wrong with sessions like this is nobody argues anymore, right? Nobody argues. Nobody says, actually, that's wrong, because everybody wants to be polite, and we all know each other, most of us do, right? I see a couple of you back there. And you're fine arguing over a pint or over a cup of coffee or something, no problem for a lot of you, or below the line in CityWire, hello. And I can see some of you with your little fake names, and we all know who you are, right? We can do it there, my little keyboard warriors. Well, you don't get to be keyboard warriors today. Today you get to do it properly. Today we want people to disagree. Today we have a license to go at the topic, to disagree constructively, to say, that's not my experience, you don't speak for me there. We want that. We want it in the room, and there'll be roving mics and all that stuff. You've got access to a portal as well in the room where you can type questions in if you're a shy one and you don't want to ask questions out loud. I can't imagine that's many of you, to be honest. But also for the streamers at home, we're monitoring all your chat and all your questions on iPads back up in Edinburgh and down here on the stage, so we can see the questions that you're asking. There'll be lots of chances to do that. But I want everybody to acknowledge as they come into today that if we're going to try and make this something that actually readdresses some thinking, right, that actually makes us feel a little uncomfortable as we go along, rather than clever people agreeing with each other, then we all have to do that. And a huge part of that will be the practitioners, the planners, the paraplanners, who get up here and say things that might not be popular. And that's an incredibly brave thing to do. And for me, I don't know about you, mate, but for me, the best outcome of today would be that we go at it hard, and it's a busy day, right? There's a lot going on. We're going to do a lot of investment stuff before lunch, and then the afternoon goes really fast. So you're going to have to stay with it as well. But at the end of that, if we've really, really gone hard at it, we've disagreed with each other, and then the people who disagreed with each other most fundamentally and vociferously are seen together having a glass of wine upstairs at the end, that would be an amazing result for me. That's what I want from today more than anything else. So listen, I think we should probably shut up, don't
absolutely.
you?
So our first session of today, we're going to present some of our own research, and you might be more used to hearing me talk about it. There's loads of people in the room today. I've had a look at the attendee list who have blessed us with their time, completing our State of the Advisor Nation survey year on year on year. It's in its wave 5, just out last month. It's our biggest wave ever, with over 600 members of the profession taking part. I'm not going to take you through it. For a change, we've got 2 colleagues up on stage. I'd like to introduce you to one of them. He is a chap by the name of Rich Mayer. He joined us just over a year ago. Man, he's made such a difference to our team, just bringing a fresh perspective to the data, to the questioning, to the analysis. Just like a great all-round guy as well. More a friend than a colleague than anything. So that's Rich Mayer. And we also have...
Oh yeah, Mike Barrett as well.
Mike Barrett.
Rich.
Wow. Good morning, everyone. I'm Rich Mayer, and thanks very much for that very exaggerated introduction there, Steve, and a nice, typically understated slide for the Landcat to start with. So yeah, delighted to be here in such a beautiful building in front of what is obviously the most beautiful people in the industry. It makes a very big change to my usual audience of 200 sweaty punks into a small room. So yeah, the aim of this session is to challenge kind of set the tone of the day and to challenge each other. And to that end, I'm delighted to be joined by Mike Barrett. For those who don't know, I'm a Portsmouth fan and Mike is a Southampton fan, so we're obliged to disagree on everything anyway. So yeah, we're going to be curious and play the devil's advocate and look under rocks before we go back to throwing them at each other across the Solent.
Sounds good to me. And I'm going to extend the welcome to Rich as well, who, as you can see, has managed to spare some time from filming The Last of Us to come on the stage to talk about centralised investment propositions, which I think,
worse, for sure.
If you can click on the next slide, Rich, that will be the first thing we talk about. So, centralised investment propositions. This has been a mainstay of the advisor research which we've conducted for 5 years now, consistently looking to see actually how the investment side, from an investment solution, whatever that might be, to the platforms, how those packaged up and delivered to the end customer. The regulator kind of quite likes CIPs. I think it's good, consistent, repeatable outcomes. I think they talk a lot about the same clients seeing different advisors in different firms around the country, whatever that might be, getting the same sort of outcome. So CIPs tend to be pretty dominant, 91% in our latest survey, and I think the lowest it's ever been about 4 or 5 years ago was about 80-something% as well. So the vast majority of firms operate a CIP, and I think it's probably fair to assume the ones who say that they don't, if you start to pick away at that, there is actually some commonality of solution and platform or whatever that might be when you start to kind of really look underneath the engine and what's going on. But Rich, what is actually happening?
Well, as this slide builds, we've got firms running at least one type of CIP, as Mike said. 91% are running at least one type, and the most common one that we'll see here is where this optionality is running underneath. So that'll be, we're running a range of portfolios, and we're having passive, blended ESG versions of that. Now, we explore in the report quite into some detail of how that works for different size firms, different makeup of firms. But for a moment, I'm just going to stick with, let's say, medium to larger size firms running their own models, and whether we're seeing that repeatable outcome and that economy of scale. And typically, we're not. That optionality, even though they've got more resource to throw at this sort of stuff, the optionality that goes with it and adding more clients each time, portfolio drift, actually means that they're often throwing a lot more money at this than they would have expected. And it's this sort of clamour for, it's an overriding theme throughout the SOTAN, is this element of control and this looking for more control. And that brings us on to our second pillar, which is probably the most contentious of the day. And it's things like this complexity that's built up through firms through years, along with things like service that you might get from basically anyone but your primary provider. And those sorts of things, those sorts of frustrations, and leading to that overall conversation of whether it's better to do everything in-house and look at the advisor as platform model.
So the advisors of platforms had a lot of noise, a lot of kind of debate around this. I mean, I've been working in this industry profession for God knows how long. I know a lot of very, very good advisors. I know a lot of people who are very, very good at running a platform, and that Venn diagram very, very rarely overlaps. So the firms, the advice firms who are running a platform here, and to be clear around that, that means you are taking on your advice service permissions, you've really got to know what you're doing. So if we can look at the next slide, we can start to see kind of what the advisor view around all of this is, and you can see that we've kind of got 15-16% of advisors have already got to that point and have completely discounted it. And around about half it's kind of, yeah, we're not considering it at the moment. It is very much a niche. If you are going to be running a platform as an advice business, I think the technical term is that shit gets real very, very quickly. So you have got to be in the top decile in terms of operational control, oversight, client money. most advice firms sail under the radar from the regulator, and you're going to have to be very unlucky or do something really bad to get contacted by the regulator. If you want to spend some quality time being grilled by the regulator, the best way to do it as an advice firm is to start to take on your advice permissions, your platform permissions, and start to move into the world of handling client money. And if you get that wrong, or even the regulator suspects you might get it wrong at some point in the time, you can be writing a check out to them fairly quickly off the back of that. So this feels a really niche market. There are firms who do it, and there are firms who can do it really well, and we'll be hearing from one of them later on today. But the vast majority of advice firms I know, the vast majority of good advisors I know, frankly, should go nowhere near this. One of the probably easiest ones, and I think actually if you're paying attention, you'll notice that we've jumped to pillar 5 at the moment, and there's no real reason for that. It's just because we decided to do it, really. So, but pillar 5 is probably one of the, again, one where there's different views, I think, around the room. But we hear, again, a lot of noise, perhaps from the under-the-line Citywire, although I can see Money Marketing Audience. That's obviously my publication of choice before I go to Citywire, particularly as they're holding their conference today as well.
That's
so
a good point.
Boo to them. So one of the kind of hot topics amongst the advice profession is kind of this shift towards behavioural. Some of the loudest voices tend to be that you need to be a proper financial planner, otherwise you are not a proper financial advisor or proper anything really. So we wanted to kind of test this amongst our audience and actually see where do advisors self-identify themselves on this range from kind of a transactional advisor all the way up to a hug the client 4 times a year, proper financial planner. Rich, what are the numbers telling us?
So the majority of people are somewhere in the middle, but that's kind of not what we're here to talk about today. We're here to talk about the 2 extremes. So if we're going from the left-hand side, we've got our more transactional, traditional type of FA, perhaps more sales-driven, and on the right-hand side, as Mike said, it's the hug them 4 times a year. I think the first thing to note is that they're the 2 very different, almost opposite skill sets. So this move that we're hearing of moving towards the right-hand side is quite a difficult jump for some people. And perhaps if we're on the left-hand side and you're good at your job and you're generating good client outcomes, then really what's the problem with that? And I think as the other thing to note is the difference between age splits. I mean, we might want to assume that perhaps younger advisors are moving towards more of a behavioural side of planning, but we're seeing a good chunk of advisors on that sort of salesy side of things. And there's probably a couple of reasons for that. Perhaps if we're looking at the advisors who have been longer in the market, maybe they've already built up their client bank already, and then perhaps that they've started to outsource some of the elements, and that's given them more time for financial planning, and it's more of a gradual thing. Whereas the younger advisors might still need to build that bank, and that older style, the more traditional style of advising might help them generate that bank a bit more quickly. And we've heard for a long time, and we'll probably hear about it for a long time afterwards, about the average age of an advisor, and though looking out on the room, obviously it doesn't look like that. But yeah, there's a constant need for new blood to come through. And say what you want about restricted propositions, but there's a lot of them are running academies, and a lot of them are bringing in newer advisors, younger advisors. And quite where that goes afterwards is probably more down to the individual, where you want to be on this scale. But they're the ones given the opportunity to, on a bigger scale, and have the resources to do it. Which brings us to our next slide. Free choice is better than a restricted choice. Mike, what do you think?
Yeah, so this is, again, kind of another kind of regular piece of Lancat research. I think when Steve's not bullying me on Twitter, one of the things he talks about most often is this advisor paradox that exists, where, particularly for independent advisors, they're obsessed with trying to get the best combination of systems and the best outcome possible for their customer, yet they're incredibly frustrated at the same time with the lack of integration and having to get loads of systems and providers and platforms, etc., to talk to each other. And if we can jump to the next slide, you can see that kind of how stark that is in the independent financial advisor world, this frustration and this, as I said, this obsession with trying to match the best client reporting tool with the best risk profiler, with the best platform, and then, oh, here comes another good platform, so let's unplug that and all the rest of that stuff. That's continuous with advisor businesses. But when we asked the same question, and it was a completely kind of open-ended question to advisors as well, and look at that from a restricted audience, and they're much, much happier with their lot. So I think inevitably some of that's kind of almost self-fulfilling. So if you are, say, part of St James's Place, you are going to be using St James's Place's kit, and you're probably going to be saying that your employer is really good. That's what you're supposed to say to employers, isn't it? But most, yeah, so there's a bit of kind of, marking your own homework around all of this. But the restricted advisors we speak with are extremely confident in their technology stack. They don't moan about integrations. They don't moan about what's going on between certain platforms, all of the other stuff. And also when you look at, some of the other stuff that happens in the restricted firms, putting aside kind of the quality or not of the overall customer outcome. Rich has mentioned the advisor academies that the restricted firms invest in heavily, and putting in 300-400 chartered individuals into the sector on an annual basis. A lot of those firms are doing. And some of the technology that we see as well. So some of the vertically integrated businesses, their adoption of technology, the way they manage that and roll that out around the country is better than pretty much any firm, which other firms we can see as well. So restricted, as I said, you have to have that customer outcome debate as part of it, but I think there's a lot more to it, and you can see here just how different it is in terms of kind of where the advisors sit in terms of their own kind of self-perception, self-worth. Right, final slide, or moving on to pillar 4, which is the 5th pillar, if you've managed to keep up around all of this one. So we wanted to kind of close off slightly kind of different around this one. This isn't necessarily me and Rich arguing the data. It's more just kind of setting out exactly what we're seeing within the data and having this as kind of a benchmark, not only for this 5th pillar as we go later on into the day, but perhaps for the rest of the day as well. So broad versus niche. What does the advice sector actually think it is? I think the research which we have, the advice sector probably thinks that it is quite a broad church. So the analysis we've done and the questions we put through SOTAN shows that around about half of firms, only about half of firms will have a minimum fee for clients, and the larger firms have no minimum fees whatsoever. So the proposition, the church is quite broad for advice. But it's starting to become a little bit more niche. The reality perhaps is a little bit different. Niche is not necessarily a bad thing. It can become a bad thing. You could decide you're going to work with punk-loving Portsmouth football fans who look like the dude from The Last of Us, but that's a fairly small niche you're going to be developing your business around, and I would contend you're probably not going to be commercially successful off the back of that. I mean, look at him, you're not going to make any money off the back of him at all. But having a bit more of a focus around the types of customers you are, rather than a completely broad church, makes a lot of sense, and is also where the regulator is starting to push people in the direction of. But the advice sector has been successful. The last 10 years, I can remember RDR a decade ago, but it's a different profession than it was a decade ago, and it has been a successful 10 years. So the question is this success going to be maintained over the next decade? So let's have a quick look at the numbers just to emphasize that success.
Yeah, so what we're seeing here is obviously a healthy and buoyant sector in terms of the snapshots that we see now. Profit is going up, revenue is going up, and we know that 75% of it is recurring revenue. And that's a pretty healthy place to be. But the regulator has expressed some concerns of it. They spoke about this in our Edinburgh event last year, that there are concerns about how much of this was recurring. And it's something, and Dear CEO letters followed after that.
Next slide. So going back to the advisor research, as Richard said, this 75% recurring revenue, that safety net is a good thing. I mean, God knows the advisors I was speaking to just over 2 years ago were extraordinarily grateful to have that predictable revenue as we went into the pandemic. But you can see when we ask advice firms about their client turnover, it's relatively low. There are advisors, I think there's a few in the room who I know deliberately don't take on any new clients because they've hit that level of kind of maximum client servicing they want to achieve, and it will only be maybe kind of direct referrals from an existing client that will come in. And if we look on the next slide, final slide for us, you can see kind of this 5-year view for where firms want to take the business. It's pretty much the same. It's been a successful period, it's been a successful decade, so we're going to carry on doing what we're going to do more of the same, really. There's maybe a little bit around some of the stuff around the edges, around kind of more transformational opportunities, so an acquisition, M&A stuff, exiting. I mean, some of the stuff around technology transformation we talked around as well, but broadly carrying on doing what we want to be doing, more of the same. But this broad church, which we talked about a moment ago, around kind of the lack of minimum fees and in theory the advice being delivered to anyone who comes in and is willing to pay the fees that are on offer, I think the reality is already slightly different. So that 75% that was on a couple of slides ago, that equates to 3.2 million people who are paying ongoing fees on an annual basis to financial planners. And those of you who can do the mental arithmetic, that's about 4% of the population who are paying fees to a financial planner advisor on a regular basis. That's quite a small niche already, it feels to me. To do the mental arithmetic, Steve, that's 96%, I think, who are not paying fees in the population. Yeah, I hope we checked that one, that's good. So it's already quite a small part of the population who are paying those fees. And as Rich has identified, Lancat Live up in Edinburgh, the regulator talked about we're going to start looking at whether those fees are suitable. So if that 75% of your revenue suddenly becomes under regulatory threat, that's not necessarily a good place to be. Right, who had, what are we today? Oh, 11:40 for when does the words consumer duty get mentioned in the consumer duty sweepstake. So not only is that suitability review coming in, but consumer duty is coming down the line as well, which is going to focus not only on value for money for services, so that will be the stick that the regulator will use to beat, if necessary, the advice sector on the suitability of ongoing fees, but it requires a much more detailed documentation of your target market, much more a granular approach in terms of who are you actually targeting. So the regulator is forcing you down this path of creating a niche, and that conflicts with this broad church that I think the advice sector wants to be giving out to people and wants to have rightly as many people with the ability to access advice. How can something be suitable if you've got to make it available to everybody? The answer is it can't. You're going to have to start to fall away customers around the edges, and customers perhaps who aren't quite there at the moment. It's not core client, it's not necessarily value for money. They're going to get excluded from working with financial planners. Next time we're in London, spoiler alert, we're going to talk a little bit about the advice gap, or we will do if I pull my finger out and get the research done on that. It is actually out in the field at the moment, and I think quite a few of you already completed the research, and the consumer research is out in the real world as well at the moment. But we're looking at a different sector of what's happening for D2C consumers in particular. So you look at what's happening briefly in the D2C market. The likes of Hargreaves, Interactive Investor, Fidelity, they're all acquiring clients in their late 30s, early 40s, accumulating wealth. So quite a big difference from the typical client who's working with a financial planner. Vanguard are acquiring more clients than those three D2C providers put together on a rolling basis at the moment. So the clients of the future, perhaps, who are accumulating wealth, they're building their financial relationships elsewhere. They're with the D2C providers. And their hedge, their belief is that they won't, when they get to kind of 50, 55, 60, they'll remain a Hargreaves client. Hargreaves would have probably got round to offering an advice service by then, and that's the D2C breach. But the advice gap is getting bigger. The research which we've already done around that is starting to spoil that and to show that is very much the case. But that's really it for today. I mean, for our session today, not the entire event, obviously. Sorry to disappoint you. As I said a moment ago, the last decade has been very much successful. The rise in professionalism, again, we can think back to the RDR days, those of us who are old enough to remember back then, and it's been transformational in terms of what's happening in terms of customer propositions and the outcomes that people have been generating. And it's a good place from a business point of view as well. Those numbers Rich had are a really positive endorsement of how firms are working. Profits going in the right place, revenues growing, recurring revenue built into the businesses as well. The question is, what will the firms of the future look like? How will that develop over the next 10 years? And if we were going to start again, what would we do to make sure that that carries on, that success carries on over the next decade? And that's it from us.
And we're done.
Thank you very much.
All right.